Welcome everyone to another edition of ICTV Headlines. Alongside Rob Harrington, I'm Dijana Kunovac. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, in a bit of shocking news late last week, junior forward James Michael McAdoo announced that he will not be coming back for his senior year and will in fact be entering the 2014 NBA draft. I think shocking is probably the best word. So Rob, how shocked were you at his decision?
Absolutely. We were talking last week in Chicago about how we thought it was almost a formality that McAdoo would return to school, given the fact that almost no one believes that he will be drafted in the first round. It seemed like the momentum of his decision would be to return. So I was completely caught off guard.
Do you think that it was the correct decision, though? Because I've gone back and forth a little bit on this. You know, we look back at his freshman year, and his draft stock has been dropping ever since. So do you feel like this was the right decision for him?
I think it's very arguable. I could certainly see the argument that he should return, maybe play for a much better team. On the other hand, how much improvement would he make to his draft position? Seniors get nitpicked. Everything about his game has been examined thoroughly, and in some cases probably to the negative. I mean, let's be honest. His free throw shooting and things like that are major liabilities in terms of his ability to score. So I think from his perspective, especially if he can graduate this summer, which I don't know the details of that, but if he can graduate, getting a head start on his career, the extra year of income, even if that income is in the D-League, or especially if it's overseas, where I think he would be an excellent player, even if he doesn't make the NBA right away.
That was one thing that I was going to ask. What kind of stuff do you feel like he can work on or needs to work on to prove to scouts and to NBA teams and all the guys looking at him that he can be a first-round draft pick? Because most of the stuff that I've seen on him has him going late second round, and some mock boards don't even have him getting drafted at all. So what does James Michael McAdoo need to do to help his stock?
Certainly he has to shoot the ball a bit better than he ever has. Not only from the foul line, as we mentioned, but also from mid-range, and just have some kind of scoring identity. But along with that, I think he needs to embrace a utility style. When he was in high school, I believe I wrote that he would be an elite utility forward. But I think he still doesn't quite embrace that yet. I think for the NBA, he absolutely has to be a utility guy, because they're not going to force him into being an offensive player if he isn't. There's no shortage of 6'8", 6'9" players who can score in the NBA. So I think being a defender where he is good, being a transition player, being able to defend some maybe smaller power forwards, to stretch forward, as well as some bigger wings. I think that's how he makes a roster.
And do you see him doing well in the NBA, maybe with some time, maybe in the right situation, that kind of thing? I like to use Kendall Marshall as an example because although he wasn't successful in Phoenix, he's doing great in LA so far.
That's right. I think finding a fit will be good. I think calibrating expectations, not only from his camp, but also for fans and former coaches and other people involved with him. You know, he might be a 10th to 12th man on an NBA bench, but if he can do that for 7 or 8 years, then that's a very lucrative proposition. You're not a bust if you have a 7 or 8 year career, and I think he has the potential to do that. I will be surprised if he ever becomes a star or an impact scorer or anything like that.
All right, let's focus a little bit more on the team and what kind of effect that's going to have on them next year, because many had them pegged to be a championship team for next year. You know, you got James Michael coming back, Marcus Page, that tough little nut. So let's talk about the individual players first. What kind of effect do you think this has on Bryce Johnson?
I think it's huge for Bryce Johnson because there's no way that he could play 30 minutes per game with McAdoo on the team. Well, or he couldn't have played 30 minutes per game at power forward, let's put it that way. Maybe he could have split his time up at center. But he needs 30 minutes per game, and what you're trading out is a high-usage, lower-efficiency player like McAdoo for a high-usage, but also high-efficiency player in Johnson. I think he's going to have a superb season. I think the real downside for the team will be on defense. McAdoo was an excellent defensive player. Johnson is not.
Bryce Johnson hates playing defense.
Yeah, I think he'll improve, but he hasn't been at McAdoo's level yet, certainly. I think Hicks will step in some, but now you're talking about more minutes for the backup centers behind Kennedy Meeks, very unproven players like Joel James and Desmond Hubert, who have made meaningful contributions, but when you compare them against McAdoo's value to the team, I think that's where they'll get hurt a little bit. But I think 30 minutes for Johnson is a big gain for the team, actually. And I think when you think long-term, Isaiah Hicks now
will ask about him next.
Probably play 20 minutes per game next year, or roughly 15 to 20. And that would be huge for the 2016 team, which depending on who comes back could also be a title team. So from a program perspective, I think there's obviously some downside for next year, but also some real upside next year and for the following season.
We saw Hicks play against Iowa State when Bryce Johnson got hurt, and he seemed a little uncomfortable playing at the 4 just because he hasn't played there so often. So how do you think this is going to affect his game and help him grow? Do you think he'll feel the pressure? Is he really ready to step up? Because I feel like fans were a little disappointed with his performance, but he played the 3 so much, and that was just not his natural spot.
I defended him all year for that reason.
Yeah.
I don't think it was, he did not expect to play the 3. Carolina didn't recruit him to play the 3. So I think now that he'll return to the 4, he has almost guaranteed minutes now behind Johnson. He could end up in some cases, if Johnson doesn't stop fouling so much, he could get some really big minutes, maybe more than they would even like for him to have. So I think he'll be fine. He'll be at a position he's comfortable with, especially with an off-season to train there, to play there in practice with guaranteed minutes. I think a big improvement is in store for Hicks. If we are talking a year from now about his playing 8 or 10 minutes per game and not producing, then I would be as disappointed as everyone else.
Starting lineup. We had it all set for next year. All set. Complete curveball. Now, what do you see the starting lineup being for next year for this team?
I thought that what we saw in Chicago with all the McDonald's festivities really threw a loop into it for me.
Oh, yeah.
Because I had thought it would be Page and Tokido and Jackson and McAdoo or Johnson and Meeks. I still think 4 of those things are unchanged. You know, swap out McAdoo, put in Johnson.
Okay.
But Theo Pinson there, although he wasn't as good in the game, actually outperformed Justin Jackson in practices. And he is a more natural 2-guard than Jackson, while Jackson has a player who also is a natural wing forward at his position, JP Tokido. So I think Pinson has a little bit easier path to starting, but I still think Jackson is a little bit ahead of him in terms of polish, maybe way ahead of him in terms of polish, if not explosiveness. To me, that's 50-50. They're both going to play a lot, but in terms of who starts games, TBD.
All right, so we're thinking Page, Tokido, Jackson/Pinson, Johnson, and then Meeks. That's what we're going with?
I think the other 4 are pretty easy.
No Dijana Kunovac? What, Rob? Come on.
Seventh individual. We can't call you 7th man. 7th individual. But I think, yes, I think Meeks has established himself as superior to the other centers. I'll be real surprised if anyone's able to jump him. And he gives them an excellent rebounder. Actually, the Johnson-Meeks front court on the whole will be a really good rebounding front court, especially now with Tokido crashing the glass, potentially with Pinson and Jackson. I think it'll be a fantastic rebounding team.
So that was going to be my final question. With McAdoo leaving, obviously it is a blow to the scoring side and other aspects, but how much do you really think it's going to affect the level of play that this team is going to have next year?
I haven't changed my expectations at all. I think there's greater risk, obviously, of injury now in the front court. They lose depth. We don't know how it's going to affect their team defense because this past year's team didn't play consistent defense. So how would you assess next season's team? Even with McAdoo, they were inconsistent. I still view them as a top 7 to 12 team at worst. Depending on what else happens, of course, there are some NBA decisions that are still looming for other teams.
Oh, I thought you meant for this team, and I was like, who's leaving, Rob? You got some intel?
At least one other big recruiting decision, another McDonald's All-American. So I think they could even be top 5 preseason, maybe. But certainly a Sweet 16 should be the expectation for that team if they can stay healthy. I think they have a decent chance of a Final Four and at least a fringe chance of winning it all. I don't think they're any worse than Kentucky has been this season. They've picked it up lately. I don't think they are any worse than the other Final Four teams, the UConn and Wisconsin. I think they could play with any of those teams. The 2015 Tar Heels.
All right, well, there you go. You heard it from Rob Harrington. No expectations, guys. Don't get your hopes up. Not at all. That's going to be it for this edition of ICTV Headlines. Thanks for joining us, everyone.